Hi. Let's talk about The Lightning Thief.
Musical styles are still a very important form of communication for our young people. Hi, I'm Joe Feinstein.
Whenever I hear this film being brought up in conversation, I often hear one of two things. Either A, oh, the author of the original book didn't like this film adaptation, therefore I'm not going to give it a chance, her. Or 2/B, I've never heard of that film before, what is that? So, to people who are of the latter camp, this episode is for you. And for people of the former camp,
get the hell out! Get out! Get out! Get out!
This unappreciated gem came out in 2010, helmed by the same man who years prior helmed the first half of the Harry Potter franchise, Chris Columbus. Craig Titley was chosen to handle the screenplay after his work with Scooby-Doo in 2002, going on to work on the much-loved Clone Wars series, as well as having a huge hand in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The cast is a legit high-caliber lineup. For the main trio of heroes, we get Logan Lerman as Percy, Brandon Jackson as Grover, and Alexandria Daddario as Annabeth. Each of them has gone on to do some tremendous work, but there's none more so perfect of an example than Logan starring in The Perks of Being a Wallflower 2 years later. Quick side tangent, The Perks of Being a Wallflower is an incredible film, and you should stop whatever you're doing, and yes, that means even watching this episode, and go and take a look at it. He's incredible, the cast is incredible, the story in general is credible, the music is top tier.
You'll laugh, you'll cry, it'll change your life.
As impressive as the main trio are, the supporting cast will fucking baffle you. Sean Bean is Zeus, Kevin McKidd is Poseidon, Steve Coogan is Hades, Pierce Brosnan is Charon, Uma Thurman is Medusa, Rosario Dawson is Persephone, Julian Richings as the Ferryman. They even have Catherine Keener and Joe Pantoliano as Percy's parents. So here's the long and short of the story. Someone stole Zeus's lightning bolt, and for whatever reason, everyone thinks Percy, the son of Poseidon, did it, so he has to go and find it and return it before Zeus declares a god civil war. Now, in the film, it's never really made clear why they think Percy of all people did it, despite the fact that the gods should know full well Percy knows 0% about his heritage, and is the last person on Earth who would ever try and pull that shit. Is it in the books? Yeah, probably, but this isn't about the books now, is it? Now, right from the first few moments of the film, we get two really great show-don't-tell moments. And yeah, to be fair, the first one gets almost immediately expounded upon, but it's such a crucial part of the story that even doing that brief moment of a show-don't-tell has to be given a round of applause. The first is, as I said, during the opening credits. We see the storm clouds everywhere and the lightning is really violent, and then all of a sudden, the lightning completely stops and you're just left in the quiet. A few moments later, you find out that that's the moment the bolt was stolen, but the fact that we're seeing it from the sky and not from the ground is another small bit of foreshadowing for a reveal later in the film. The second of the fantastic show-don't-tell moments is when we first meet Percy. We get a long take of him sitting quietly and calmly at the bottom of the pool for over a full minute. Not only does this show us his natural affinity for the water that he got from his dad, it gives us one of the 2 times in the film we get to see but not hear him deep in contemplation, because as he says,
"There's one place I can think."
Now, as much as I enjoy Percy, to me, he's kind of the least interesting character to talk about in the film. He's your average reluctant hero, there's really nothing super new there, but a few of the other people surrounding him definitely deserve some mentions. Now, the first of the two is Grover, his best friend and chosen protector. Now, I'll be the first to admit that his knowledge is oddly lacking for someone who's born and raised in this world, but that aside, he does provide a majority of the laughs as well as showing his true commitment to Percy and his well-being.
No, I'm going alone.
No, I'm coming with you.
No.
You're being followed.
As soon as Percy gets attacked by the Fury, he wastes no time in following Chiron's orders and gets Percy out of town as soon as possible. And while he didn't help against the Minotaur, there are actually 2 points to factor in that do get addressed. A, he soon points out that he's just a
Junior Protector,
which is a clear indicator that though he held his responsibilities seriously, he's clearly undertrained and equipped to handle something of this scale, seeing as Percy was meant to be hidden all of his life, and the more powerful a protector you place with him, the greater the chance he'll be discovered. And that leads into point B, which is that he shows some real regret for failing Percy and losing Percy's mom. It's a rather emotionally mature moment for Percy that when he wakes up and realizes that what happened wasn't a dream, he doesn't hold any sort of grudge against Grover. He knows Grover did his best and genuinely feels bad for failing, and without a word, simply gives him a reassuring pat and just moves forward to the task at hand. It ultimately culminates in Grover being willing to be stuck in Hades forever. And yeah, sure, Rosario Dawson is incredibly attractive, and who wouldn't want her to look at them like that? But it doesn't take away from the fact that he willingly gave up his life to spend eternity in hell so Percy could escape with his mom. He's a true friend to the end, and he definitely earned those horns, regardless of how small they seem to be. Also, it's a small detail that can go by pretty quick without much notice, but I do enjoy the fact that when we first meet Grover, he's wearing camouflage pattern clothing, giving us that small indication that he's hiding something. The second of the characters, who I honestly didn't expect to want to talk about when I first set out to do the episode, is the character of Luke, son of Hermes. Now, if you watch this channel for any length of time, you know I don't really do spoiler alerts. Movies I talk about are usually fairly old, and I believe my talking about certain twists and aspects can only add to the desire to want to go back and rewatch something. So, right off the bat, Luke is the bad guy.
What?
But in the little time that we get with him on screen and what we hear of him, we actually get more than enough information to realize that he's the antagonist. The largest of the giveaways that he's the lightning thief is that in every scene where he gets to speak, at some point we'll talk about not liking the gods.
I'm Luke, son of Hermes and camp leader. Not necessarily in that order. My dad's a jerk. I've never met him. You too? Guess we all got daddy issues, huh? That's because all gods are the same. Selfish. They only care about themselves.
The clue that he's the son of Hermes and gives Percy flying shoes should also be enough to tell you that it was him who flew up and stole the bolt, because as I mentioned a moment ago, we see the bolt taken from the sky and not from the ground view, meaning it was from Luke's perspective. But it goes even deeper than that once you look closer. When Hades shows up in camp and demands he be given the bolt, we get a brief cut to Luke looking really concerned. Later in that evening, Luke is seen playing video games in his tent, and at first just seems like a fun bit of teen writing, but it's actually another hint about his agenda, because he welcomes Percy to
The modern world.
and says that everyone at some point comes to his tent to get away from the Renaissance crap. Not to mention, he casually asks Percy to fight his dad if he runs into him.
You're gonna have to promise me one thing. If you see my dad on the highway to hell, kick his ass for me.
Annabeth even gives us an early hint when she says,
Would have been nice if Luke had warned us about Medusa.
which is a huge tell to the audience that he had the map, knew where these pearls were, yet chose not to warn them about what they would be walking into. But honestly, Luke isn't wrong. So many times in recent cinema, we've clung to villains and why they had a point. Killmonger and Thanos are easy examples to point to, but this film did it a decade sooner. Luke has an absolutely solid argument in that the gods are only concerned with their power and authority over those they deem lesser. Luke wants to do away with the old order and embrace something new, and it's pretty hard to argue against that. Honestly, had Luke been straight with Percy from the jump, I'd argue Percy would have either joined him, or at the very least, not gotten in his way. But I do suppose it can speak to Luke's shaky faith in his own beliefs that he didn't think being honest with Percy was an option, or maybe you could argue that it was his original plan, knowing that Percy was going to be hell-bent on saving his mom and wouldn't care about anything else, thus leaving him as the perfect scapegoat. My point is, there's a lot in between the lines that actually make him a really compelling antagonist, and I appreciate they took the time to do that. Something else I really appreciate is that even if you take out the starting scene with Zeus talking about Poseidon's son, there are actually some really fun teases at the start of the film to clue us into who Percy is. The biggest and most obvious is when Percy's teacher asks him to name a Greek hero and hints that he's named after that hero. When Percy gets out of the pool and says he feels just much more comfortable in the water, Grover gives him a smile and a knowing look. When Percy gets led into the empty room by his substitute teacher, we get a brief frame of a suit of armor behind Percy that looks almost exactly like the helmet, shield, and sword he'd go on to use later in the film. And when the supposedly new substitute teacher arrives, she somehow already knows his full name.
I'm Miss Dodds, your substitute English teacher. Would someone please explain what Shakespeare was trying to convey in this line from Othello? Percy Jackson.
which makes sense a few minutes later when we find out she's actually a Fury looking for him. But what's more interesting is the phrase she writes on the chalkboard, which is foreshadowing two of their conversations. The first is the class itself. She's seemingly already upset and asks Percy what Othello meant by the quote, to which he's unable to give an answer. The second is when she reveals herself and demands to be given the bolt. Both times she speaks angrily towards him, and although he can understand the fury in her words, he can't understand her words because he has zero idea what all of this means, and he has no idea that the god stuff is real. Now, before I get to my last point, I do want to preface it by saying this. Representation matters, across the board, that's just a fact. And even though I don't have any personal experience in the subject matter I'm about to get into, I still really appreciate that the book, and by extension the movie, did its best to give us this kind of representation in a fun and creative way. Percy is the biggest of the examples in that he deals with dyslexia and ADHD. When he struggles to read the chalkboard, we can actually see him start to tear up out of frustration. And we do see him slightly jittery and unable to really sit still at times. But it's revealed that the dyslexia is caused by his brain being partially hardwired to read ancient Greek and not modern English. His ADHD is revealed to be the result of his latent godlike power, never allowing him to be fully still and always be ready to be thrown into combat. Grover uses crutches while out in the real world to disguise his goat legs, and is clearly more comfortable in his natural form. However, a lot of the combat we see him do in the film is actually with his crutches, since he's gotten so used to using them. Charon hides himself as a disgruntled, scruffy teacher in a wheelchair, but it's revealed that he's a centaur in disguise. And again, I don't have any personal experience with dyslexia, ADHD, or any big disability outside of dealing with depression. And maybe some people saw this and took offense that it wasn't the kind of representation they wanted. But personally, I really enjoyed the story they were trying to tell, and the overall message that even if you have a disability, or someone may seem like they have a disability, it never stops anyone from embracing who they are and still seeking grand adventures to go on. So there we have it, another movie to throw on your Critical Cinemas watch list. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe for more content, and let me know what other movies you'd like me to tackle. But I'm curious, what do you think?
Musical styles are still a very important form of communication for our young people. Hi, I'm Joe Feinstein.